All right, welcome to Econ Nerds Live, a celebration and discussion of economics. Today we have an interview with Kelly Vedi of the Substack Avocational. Sorry, I just asked you how to pronounce it and I just messed it up.
Vocational is great. You can say avocational if you want.
However you want to say it. But it's focused on an important topic, but kind of an under-discussed topic, apprenticeships. So Kelly, can you tell us maybe how you settled on this particular topic?
Yes. So for the reasons you set up, important and under-discussed. So apprenticeships are a sort of both one of the most traditional ways of training people in human history. They've been around basically like since Hammurabi's Code mentions apprenticeships. So, someone who's skilled at something trains an unskilled person and how to do that and passes that knowledge on, while at the same time being really underused in modern America. And I have, through my career, been exposed to a growing apprenticeship movement in the United States and wanted to write more about that movement, share it with more people, but then also encourage more people to consider apprenticeship as a viable training strategy, especially employers.
And so what's the difference between an apprenticeship, an internship, and just like an entry-level job?
Yes. So an apprenticeship is first, it is a job. So an apprenticeship is different from an internship, and then an apprenticeship is always a job that is paid. And the goal of an apprenticeship is to convert to a full-time employee. So the goal is to take someone, train them through an apprenticeship, and at the end, they are now qualified for that entry-level role. And some other features of apprenticeship is that there's both training that happens on the job and also learning that happens more formally. So classroom-based or now in our modern world, maybe delivered virtually, but there's this mix of both on-the-job training and other formal training. And typically they're longer than internships. So in the trades, you have some apprenticeships that are 4, even 5 years. Internships are typically much shorter. You've got summer internships, semester internships, maybe a year long. So apprenticeships are typically longer. And then in an entry-level job, there is no there's no expectation that training is going to be a big part of it. You expect that people who are joining an entry-level job are going to have some learning to do, but the learning isn't necessarily formalized.
Okay. And are there jobs in the U.S. right now where the primary way you get into them is an apprenticeship?
Yes, mostly in the trades. So in construction, HVAC, those sorts of jobs, there are primarily apprenticeship entry routes into those roles.
And is this something like, for me, the idea of an apprentice like conjures up like the Middle Ages or something, or medieval, like it makes me think like this is something we used to do and then we stopped doing that. Is this an accurate perception that it was much more common in the past, or is this a misconception?
It's in America, it's true. So in America, we relied on apprenticeships far more than we do today. George Washington was an apprentice, for example. Paul Revere was an apprentice, Benjamin Franklin. But in as you referenced in the Middle Ages, there were the age of the guilds, and guilds had this big control over apprenticeship. So apprenticeship has definitely evolved a lot since then, and it's evolved differently in different countries. I've got this book over on my bookshelf about apprenticeship in early modern Europe that I won't get too into, but in Germany and Switzerland, for instance, apprenticeship is heavily used still today, and not just in the trades, but in occupations across the economy. And in Switzerland in particular, about 2/3 of young people go into apprenticeships as their primary training route.
And so, and do they have better outcomes in the U.S.? Like, is there a reason why we should look to them as, sort of a guiding light?
They do. So their youth unemployment rates are quite low. And at various points, 2008 comes to mind, there's been more attention paid to the apprenticeship countries, as they're sometimes called, the ones who really rely on apprenticeship as a training model for young people because they have such better youth unemployment rates. And that's that's one side of the coin, the benefits for young people. But then the other side of the coin is also the benefits for employers who have access to a better skilled workforce.
If this is good for the young people, if this is good for employers, why isn't it more common? Or maybe can you give us a sense of how common it is in the U.S.? Like what percent of, I don't know, people have gone through an apprenticeship program of some kind?
So apprenticeship in the US is very rare. So something like less than a percent of the total labor force right now is in an apprenticeship, which is quite small. And so it is quite rare in the US. Now to the other question about like why is it so rare?
Right.
There are a couple of reasons. So part of it is cultural, and part of it is a collective action problem. So the like in a Swiss sense, it's a very different mindset amongst employers where they just feel like it is part of their responsibility to train. Like it is part of the Swiss mindset, and around 1 out of 5 Swiss employers have apprentices. They train apprentices, so 20%. So it's part of the Swiss mindset. Um, Whereas the American mindset around training is very different. There's sort of an expectation that you find talent, not that you train talent. So there's a lot more emphasis on recruiting and sourcing and trying to identify who has the skills you need rather than training up to the skills that you need. So there are like several factors. So one is this orientation towards training, which employers in America have a different perspective towards. Another that's really important is this differing attitude towards collaborating around talent. And this shows up also in our policy infrastructure. So in the Swiss and German systems, employers don't sort of act on their own around apprenticeship. They act in industry associations or talent associations or chambers of commerce. And these groups together create standards for shared occupations. And then those influence the system. So employers have a real way to influence the apprenticeship system at scale in these countries. We do not have that in the United States. Our system is much more employer by employer, so it's more fragmented.
Can you give me a sense of what are the jobs? Because I'm thinking like, all right, if I'm an employer, there's my particular company might be very specific. Like, I might just, start somebody off and I'll just train them. I'll spend the first month training them. And this is what I would do. And there's some sense that this is what goes on in like tech companies. Like I know, doesn't Google have its own like kind of training courses you go through? And I remember at one point I was going to go work for Amazon, and it was like the expectation was the first 2 months I would just be learning their various systems. So it seems to me like potentially one of the reasons why we might not have it is that every employer is just a little different in what they need. And is there something about Switzerland or Germany where the skills are more common across the companies?
I think that's a good point. I don't think that the skills are more common across the country, the companies in Germany and Switzerland. I think it's more that they have opened up different roles to apprenticeship than they have in the United States. So, for example, there are junior software engineer apprenticeships in those countries. So you could go get hired at Amazon or Google today, and they could spend 2 months training you on the Google way to do things or the Amazon way to do things, but they're not going to spend 2 years training you how to code.
Right.
Whereas in the Swiss and the German systems, they will go ahead and train an apprentice on how to code. And that is a 2-year proposition, not a 1 month, 2 month proposition.
And so then, is it then a replacement for college? So is it a substitute for college in those countries?
Yes, it is but they wouldn't necessarily sort of think of it that way. because they have separate higher education systems. So in Switzerland in particular, they have what they call a dual vocational education and training system. And you can pursue what we in America would consider a traditional academic route. You can, go to high school and then college or university, or you can go the vocational route, which largely doesn't exist in the United States, where you can go to an apprenticeship where you're still doing that formal classroom training, but you also have the option in Switzerland to get a vocational baccalaureate degree. And then if you'd like at some point in the future, you can take your vocational baccalaureate degree and then go back over onto the academic side of things to go get an academic master's degree.
Okay, yeah, so that seems like a much better version where, you're literally learning like real skills and you're working for the companies that would potentially employ you. And obviously this would be, this could be very appealing in the US because we see, people are not getting the sense that maybe college isn't as valuable as it once was. And I believe the college wage premium has plateaued recently. And so it's, hey, we're going to work more directly with employers. Are you familiar with Waterloo? I think Waterloo does something like this, where Waterloo, I think at Waterloo, the undergrads there spent a year working for a company as part of their 4 years.
So that's the co-op model. I'm not as familiar with the Waterloo. There is the one at, I'm going to get this wrong. It's Northwestern. I believe it's either Northwestern or Northeastern, but
right. Their fault for naming themselves too close to each other. Yeah.
Right?
Come on, be unique.
So the co-op model has a lot of strengths, and it's like you say, typically it's a bachelor's degree, but with like really intensive job placement during the bachelor's degree. So like a year long, and sometimes you do like multiple co-ops during your time there. I think where the difference is that there's not that conversion expectation, right? And it's sort of like education first, whereas the job is sort of an enrichment to the education experience, whereas an apprenticeship is very much job first.
And these apprenticeships, can you give me a little bit more of a sense? So you say there's classes involved and I'm working, or is it multiple companies at the same time are doing this? Or like if I'm going to the class, is it like we're all working for different companies? Or is it just one company?
So in the Swiss system, it's multiple companies. And sometimes they've invested significant funds in even establishing shared training centers. So it's public-private partnership, braided investment in a training center where apprentices from multiple companies are getting their classroom-based training as part of their apprenticeship. So they've spent part of the time in the formal training and then part of the time on the job at their company.
Okay. But why are they training like their competitors then? Like, why are they all sort of agreeing to work together? Like, what are the incentives?
Yes. So this is something that really blows Americans' minds, is this collaboration around talent that is so common in other countries. So like the American thing is like, oh, I can't do that, right? I can't train my competitors. They'll leave. This is going to decrease my return on investment. Bad idea. So it's the reason why it works is because over the long term, it is actually a benefit to individual employers for employers to collaborate around talent. And that's for a couple of reasons. So one of them is that it makes it more attractive to apprentices. So if you think about trying to hire people, what is the better deal for you, Matt? Are you going to go work for Amazon and Amazon says, okay, but you'll only be able to gain skills that are valuable here? Or you'll also be able to gain skills where you can leave Amazon and go work for Google or go work for Meta, right?
Right,
so
right.
It's more attractive.
You want that transferability.
Yeah, the apprentices want that transferability. So you can't make it too company specific, or else no apprentices are going to sign up. But the other benefit is that there is hiring volatility at your company. So you're not going to hire every single year potentially. And by sharing training across companies and collaborating, you make sure that the talent pool doesn't disappear when your program disappears. So if you're an employer and you're out trying to go it alone and you start your own program and you invest a lot of time and money into designing training and curriculum and you hire apprentices and you've got it going, and now you hit a spot where you can't hire anymore for the next few years, what is going to happen to all of your investments? And then when you're ready to start it up again, are you going to be able to attract people? So they understand that if you can share costs, you can keep your program sustainable as your hiring needs fluctuate over time. And another thing that really blows Americans' minds is that in some of these small to medium-sized businesses, they will also share apprentices. So they will rotate an apprentice amongst employers.
Well, that's interesting. And I guess they're not too much concerned about like secrets being, spilled between companies then?
Too concerned, especially at the
Okay.
apprentice level,
Right.
where you are learning the basics of a job. So you're not being exposed to too much
Now,
proprietary
you're not learning the
information.
Coca-Cola recipe, I guess. All right. Yeah. So for the employer standpoint, I guess now I see it. Okay. A thick labor market. Like, when I need to hire, when I need to tool up fast, I need those people to be there. And so it benefits me to have this like large pool that even if I'm maybe not hiring now, it benefits me to participate in this program. And obviously from the worker side, like, okay, I want to be able to work for this employer or that employer. Ultimately, that's how I get higher wages, playing them off each other, moving from company to company. Um, so I mean, I guess what barriers do we need to overcome? If we look at the US and say, all right, this is something that we should be doing more here. Like we have these students, the expectation is, young people go off to college where they spend 4 years, learn lots of things that are potentially, unproductive, reorienting around apprenticeship may be better, also better for the employers to, have access to like, higher skilled workers. Um, like what are, like, I could see selling this to a young person and I could see selling this to the employers. So like, is it just a collective action problem? Like, how do we get more apprenticeships in the US?
So I focus a lot on the employer willingness to train piece because you can't have an apprenticeship without an employer who's willing to hire and train a young person. So there are, at this point, I would say it's important to understand the difference between a registered apprenticeship and an unregistered apprenticeship. So in the United States, we do have a formal registered apprenticeship system that exists at the federal level with the Department of Labor. But to make it extra special and complicated, some states also have their own state apprenticeship agencies. So there is nothing preventing an employer from starting an apprenticeship if they want to, and they can design it however they'd like. Now, if they want to register it, they are going to have to go through a somewhat complicated application process. And then after being approved, are going to be subject to a variety of monitoring and accountability requirements. So we don't make it particularly easy or appealing for employers to register apprenticeships currently. Because what does an employer get for going through all of that trouble? Right now, not much. In some states, they may get some small tax credits. We're talking like 500, a couple of $1,000 to go through the registration process. And in return, they have some pretty onerous accountability requirements. So it's pretty hard to get a bead on how many unregistered apprenticeships there are.
Well, this is interesting. Yeah. Cause it's
Yes.
like, why would I ever register my apprenticeship? So maybe we have way more of these, or like maybe they're just not called that
Yes.
than we actually think.
Yes. So there are right now around 700,000 active registered apprenticeships in the US. Some estimates put the number of unregistered apprenticeships at about that number.
Okay. But right now, why would I even do it? Like it doesn't seem like, it seems like I invite a lot of scrutiny. I have to comply with a lot of things. like you said, I'm getting a minuscule tax break. So it's like, why is there even one registered apprenticeship?
There are, it's a good question. There are, within the trades, there are some more sort of requirements around the trades that make more of those either necessary or more highly incentivized to be registered.
There's like some
Outside of
license,
it,
like a licensing requirement or something like that. Is that, yeah? So
and also some like so like to be able to access federal contracts, having a certain number of registered apprentices and things like that. But in the non-traditional apprenticeship occupations in the U.S., so in the U.S., apprenticeships have expanded to finance and to healthcare, to business, to coding. So they are expanding into these industries, but registration is lagging. So there are some reasons to register.
is this a role for government to solve this collective action problem, to say, hey, we're going to give you more breaks, or we're going to make it easier to register, or we're going to provide subsidies? Like, if we agree that this is something we should be doing more of, what exactly is the path, or what is the advocacy that needs to be done?
So I'd say three things. So one is really reforming the registered system and decreasing the burdens on employer sponsors for registration. And there is movement there. There was recently a notice of a, a notice of changing regulations where they're going to strip out some of the uh, equal employment opportunity requirements on apprentice sponsors, which may sound like a little questionable, but the point that they make is there's already existing equal employment opportunity laws that employers are subject to. We don't need a second set of laws for apprentice sponsors. So there is movement right now to make registration easier, to make compliance easier. And I do expect more of that to make registration simpler. The other thing you mentioned is around subsidies. So there is some research that shows that where subsidies are most needed on the employer side are around starting apprenticeships and then keeping them going through things like recessions and specifically small and medium-sized businesses. So reforming how we think about subsidizing apprenticeships on the employer side, I think towards those three things would be good. So moving away from these sort of like kind of like low dollar tax credits and more towards subsidizing employers who are taking on apprentices for the first time to sort of defray some of those startup costs. Then also targeting small and medium-sized businesses for apprenticeship dollars, and then also making sure we're thinking about when a recession hits or when there's a pandemic and thinking about funding to make sure that training dollars don't get cut during those hard times. And then the third thing I think we really need to think about is employer is around this employer collaboration. And right now, the policy environment is very much sort of employer by employer. There's not at the federal level this focus on how can we have employers working together and then give them real ways to influence the training system.
Because I said, like we sort of started with, I could see each company doing this on their own or having their own apprenticeship program, but getting them to coordinate when they haven't coordinated in the past is difficult, or seems like it would be difficult, like to get these sort of competitors that potentially don't like each other to say, hey, let's all start a big program together. That to me would require some government action, either in the form, some sort of subsidy or regulatory break or something like that. If I'm skeptical of apprenticeships, like if I'm trying to play devil's advocate, I would say, you go through this program at a potentially a pretty young age, and maybe it locks you into one career and doesn't give you flexibility, whereas going to college, maybe you learn about something that you didn't know you'd be interested in. So it opens up all these different perspectives, and that undergraduate degree is much more flexible for you to move between one career to another career, uh, and potentially in a dynamic economy, that flexibility might be more valuable than just having mastery of a skill.
I think that's a common mindset. I have a couple of thoughts around that mindset. One is I think that people overweight the power of academic learning versus the power of technical or practical learning. And sort of for a long time in America, we have, and just sort of generally, we've treated one as superior to the other, right? Like learning that is academic and theoretical can get up here sort of in the hierarchy over learning that is more practical and technical.
Well, if I were to dismantle my own argument, I would say exactly what you said, where it's okay. Seriously, think if you've gone to college, think back to your undergrad. Like, what do you remember? Like, can you remember like anything that you actually did? Can you even remember your professors' names? Okay, like, let alone what you learned in the class. If you can remember something, and we've done this at MRU, where we've asked people like, okay, what do you remember from high school? What projects do you remember? The project that people remember is always a doing. It's always something they did. Oh, I went and interviewed somebody for an oral presentation. Oh, I made a video. Oh, I recorded a podcast. So people remember doing. And if I'm an apprenticeship and I'm actually doing something, that is definitely going to stay with me much, much longer than, whatever I sat in this classroom and listened to, this old guy talk. So yeah, I don't necessarily believe like you just said that the learning in college is better than the learning on the job. But what about the second piece of it? Like, it does seem like you potentially get locked into a career, and what if whatever AI displaces that career?
Yes. So this, I think, is the other real benefit of apprenticeship is that you actually learn far better what careers are out there. Right. It is, I imagine like many people sort of start their first job and then learn about all of these other jobs that they never knew existed. And you can learn about those other jobs much better once you're in a job than in a classroom. So then when you have exposure to those jobs and also to people who are in those jobs, the skills you are gaining in your apprenticeship may not be the skills for those jobs, but now you know what those skills are. And now you know what education you need for that job that you actually want. So I imagine like two like hypothetical kids, right? Like both, 16, not knowing what they want to do. And one chooses sort of a youth apprenticeship route, and one chooses a traditional academic route. And the one who chooses a youth apprenticeship route thinks they're interested in healthcare and goes and does a pre-nursing apprenticeship and then learns that, oh, I'm actually not interested in nursing. I'm interested in radiology. And now they know exactly where they need to go. Versus the other 16-year-old who also thinks that they might be interested in nursing and then finishes high school, goes to college, is like generally pre-med, like spends 4 years, and then it's like, oh, I'm not interested in nursing.
Yeah, you actually see what you want. And I would say in my own experience, when I was in high school, I worked at an electronics company. And I saw exactly what you're saying in action, where somebody started there as basically just doing like grunt work, like, oh, carrying boxes in the warehouse or packing things up. And then they would see, oh, the programmer over there has a much better, higher paycheck, better life, or CAD, like the computer assisted drawing person, they're doing that. And so I saw people that worked in the warehouse go to night school, get those skills, and then apply for that job. Like, hey, I want to be the whatever, the drafter, or the programmer. Even in my college job, I was a beach lifeguard, and
amazing.
Yeah, I saw the same thing. You think, oh, you're at the beach all day. Like, what's going to happen? Well, what happens is bad things. Bad things happen. People get in trouble. People break bones. People, cut their heads on the surfboards and things like that. And so, ambulances would come, ERs would come, and I saw I didn't do this, but lots of lifeguards went on to become ERs because they're like, oh, I could do that job, and you feel like gives you a sense of purpose, like you're helping somebody out. And so there was like a pathway from lifeguard to ER to fireman that I don't think a lot of these people, these are just like surf bums. They probably didn't think about these careers until they actually got in the workforce. When you go to college, like how much do you really learn about the workforce from 18 to 22? Further, like how much do you really learn about what you want to do with your life from 18 to 22? You might find a couple classes that you're kind of into, but I think it's much more likely what you're saying is like within a company, there's a lot of different roles and you can sort of see which role you might fit into. Plus, you just get exposed to, I think, a lot more people from a variety of backgrounds, in within a company versus college, where we all sort of, I guess I'm thinking of elite colleges. We're all sort of from the same upper middle class background. Um, so yeah, I think there is definitely a potential for apprenticeships to be more flexible than perhaps the perception is. What about? I mean, obviously nobody knows, but what about AI? I could see a case for AI helping apprenticeships because if we think of apprenticeships as being more traditionally in the trades, working with your hands, this sort of thing, that's something that AI is probably not going to do. But I could also see like people using AI to just learn on their own. And so maybe I don't need an apprenticeship. Maybe I can, I don't know, teach myself whatever I want to do without this coordination.
I was struggling with this too because I think that there are factors with AI in apprenticeship's favor and then factors that are decidedly not in apprenticeship's favor. So one, I like pretty good boon for the trades, where apprenticeship is traditionally strong in the U.S. But a lot of the movement in the apprenticeship movement is about focused on expanding apprenticeship outside of the trades in the US and into all of these other occupations. So will AI sort of put the kibosh on that? I think some of the factors that are bad for apprenticeship are the potential erosion of entry level jobs, right? Because that's where apprenticeships start. Another is the pace of change, right? So, with a fast pace of change, will employers' willingness to train decrease because they are, worried about investments in training when they don't know what's going to happen to their company? So I think volatility itself makes some employers hesitant to make any investments. So I think that that's a challenge. I think that the piece of change makes apprenticeship look a lot better than a 4-year degree because if you're going to have to take someone and train them anyways, then apprenticeship is a model that has on-the-job training. So it's a lot faster to update your on-the-job training than to go to an education system and say, we really need you to change what you're teaching in your 4-year degree. So I think that that's a positive on the apprenticeship side. I also wonder if it's a good PR move in this point in time for some employers to make a very public commitment to people and to training, as there's a lot of fear and anxiety around AI.
Yeah, that's an excellent
Except
point. If you can be the company that is like, hey, we are investing in people, come work for us. We're doing these programs. That is, yeah, that's not something I had considered. But yeah, you could get a big PR bump from being that company. Um, when it comes to college, I think a lot of people, like when I think of, my son, he's only 8, but when I think, I'm not sending him to college to learn anything. Like I'm assuming most of what he learns he's going to forget, or he'll go get a job, and that's where he'll do most of the learning. I'm mostly sending him to college for the social experience, to expose him to, so he gets like friends for life, the dating market in college. Like, this is one of the reasons why college is so difficult to disrupt, is it offers a number of things. Like theoretically it offers training, but it offers also access to a social network, research opportunities. There's the signaling aspect where it's like, okay, look, whatever, I went to this good school, got this good GPA. So it's hard to disrupt because it's really offering a bunch of different things to different people. So even if I really like apprenticeships, or if there's a company, like I live next to El Segundo. I don't know if you know El Segundo, but all these like hard tech companies are in El Segundo. All these like former SpaceX engineers start these like technology companies in El Segundo. So I think, okay, when my son's in high school, I'll make him go work for one of these companies. But when it comes to, say, post high school, like if he did an apprenticeship there, say, instead of going to college, I would still be concerned about the social aspect. Like, okay, where is he going to get how's he going to meet his friends? How's he going to meet a future spouse? Like, because that's sort of what I got from college is like, friends for life, like access to a network. So do you have anything to say on that or response to that?
I like your plans for your son.
I'm thinking, I gotta think ahead, you gotta think
You
ahead.
got to think ahead. Lifeguarding can only take you so far. You
Lifeguarding's
got
a
to go.
terrible job. Lifeguarding is it's like you're it's
But
very
you were
boring.
a beach lifeguard. See,
It's
I was a
very
pool
well
lifeguard. Pool lifeguards have it easy.
pool lifeguarding is awesome for a college job because you get the half hour in the tower, half hour out. So I did all my homework as a pool guard in college too. But on the beach, you're pulling people out of the water all day. It's pretty boring. It's pretty mindless. We don't need to get into this, but there's a lot of drama. Actually, you would not think beach lifeguards are whatever. It's like the Real Housewives, but it's like a mini Game of Thrones because there's like 8 permanent positions where I guarded, and so all the surf bums want those permanent positions, so they're all backstabbing each other and messing around with things. So, anyways, yeah, sorry. Yeah, working for a hard tech company is, I think, a better job for him. But who knows? Obviously, you can't really control any of these things. Sorry, but social
But
networking.
yeah, social networking. So yes, there is. I think it was like a year ago. The A16Z podcast had Andreessen and Horowitz had this like long conversation about the higher education bundle and everything that was in it.
Yes,
I so
Mark Andreessen had 14 things in his bundle, I believe. I listened to that
yes,
podcast. It's funny because that's how I always start when I'm a college professor. I always start the first day talking about the bundle. I only have 5 things in my college bundle, but I'm thinking from the student side. So I was trying my 5 things are signaling, skills, self-discovery, like figuring out what you're into, the social network aspect, and I don't mean like online, but like meeting people, and then just like summer camp. Like it's just, they have fun. It's just a place to go have fun before you get hit with the real world. But I've interrupted you again. My apologies.
so yes, I so one thing that I think is unfortunate is that a lot of the times apprenticeship gets pitched as like in opposition to college, or like you can't have both. And I think, in America, we had college for all for so long that now, there is this push to sort of degrade or deride college. And I loved my college experience and want anyone who wants to go to college to be able to go to college. I think but there are plenty of people who don't. Like they do not want the bundle, right? They want to get the skills and the signaling, and maybe they don't want summer camp. They are ready to go into the real. And I think it's a problem when we don't give those people an equally viable option for them to go after what it is that they want. And there are a lot of stories because like the apprenticeship movement is part of a like decades long effort to sort of correct the destruction of vocational education in America that happened several decades ago. And so there are stories from these small programs that have existed of young people. I'm thinking of this like one from Trident Technical College that runs this Charleston Regional Youth Apprenticeship Program. And they bring her up because it's this young girl who, by her early 20s, owned her own house and owned her own car and had herself established as a young professional and also had a degree. And she accomplished all of that through apprenticeship. And I also think about I was a high school math teacher for a couple of years, and I think about some of my students who were not interested in going to college and knew exactly what it is that they wanted to do and were not being equipped to go after that. And like I think of one student, he knew he wanted to be a director. He wanted to be a film director. And he told me, and I was initially like pretty, dismissive because it's like, what do high schoolers know? They want to be a sports star or a director. It seemed very unreal. But then a couple of weeks later, he's like, I've been working on a script. Can I share it with you? And he shared with me a 78-page, perfectly formatted script for a movie that he had been working on. And he was extremely serious about what it is he wanted to do with his life. And he was not supported by his schooling environment. So he had to go out and do it by himself. He found opportunities to learn how to direct. He found like extracurricular opportunities to get his own education in what he wanted to do. And the sad thing is like there is a film industry in North Carolina and Charlotte. Like there could have been infrastructure around getting him work-based learning and apprenticeships as part of his education. We just don't do it. That's not the default around equipping students towards their careers of interest. Now, luckily, he kept at it and he is a director now. I'm very proud of him. But that was in spite of his education, not because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think you're right. I think there's a lot of students that, either aren't going to college or are pushed towards college because they think it's the thing they should do when, it's maybe not going to be beneficial, and maybe they would be better served in, going to work in one of these programs. Yeah. Do you have anything, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to talk about?
I'd say one thing for people to be aware of is to look at what's happening in Indiana, because Indiana is the state that is really on the forefront of policy changes in support of a real system of apprenticeship. And they have been working for years with this university in Switzerland to study the Swiss system and adapt it to the Indiana model. They're launching talent associations. So having these types of places where employers can collaborate around talent, and are launching a financial services academy with a statewide high school apprenticeship in the finance industry in Indiana. That is very exciting.
So watch Indiana, and I'm sure some economists will use, like they always do, the variation between states to show these. I don't know if anybody's done it already, but like you said, each state has a sort of a different regime, right, in terms of apprenticeship. So, there is a potential research project looking at which of these work best for outcomes. So I'm sure somebody will do it. Any other last thoughts, Kelly? I'll let you go.
I think I've shared what I've got for today.
And listeners, stay tuned. 10 years from now, I'll let you know. Will my son do an apprenticeship? We'll find out on the podcast. Kelly, why don't you let everyone know where they can find you online?
They can find me at my Substack, Vocational.
All right. Thanks for being a part of Econ Nerds.
Thank you for having me.